Welcome, everyone, to the podcast. I am Howard Falco, and today I'm really excited. I have a friend of mine. Her name is Tierney Rae, on for an interview with me. Tierney Rae is a meditation and yoga teacher for the last couple years and a spiritual seeker. And the way that Tierney and I met was she had read the book and had me on her book club. She has a book club where she goes through different books and teaches and talks about them, which is really awesome. And we had a really, really great conversation. And so I thought I would have Tierney on the podcast as a young spiritual seeker, someone who's looking for understanding in the world. And we just have a conversation and talk about certain things and see where it goes. So Tierney, welcome to the podcast and thanks for being on.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
And yeah, it was awesome to meet you that way. And I was thankful that you were kind enough to come on and talk to all of us in my book club. It meant so much to us. So
yeah,
thank you.
Absolutely. That it was my pleasure to do so. And it's an honor for me to share the work with anybody who's interested. And I have shared it with every single different type of group imaginable. So it was cool to be able to deliver it. And, what surprised me, not surprised me, but the depth of your questioning for someone as young as you are. How old are you?
I'm 24.
Right. Wow. That's pretty amazing that you're on as deep of a spiritual path as you're on now at this age. And I think it's really cool. And I think that it reveals a lot about Gen X, which I think you fall into, just barely. I think you fall into Generation X, that a lot of people are looking for answers right now and understanding. So I guess my first question for you, and we'll volley back and forth throughout the course of the podcast, but my first question for you is, how did you get started on the spiritual path? Like, what prompted you to begin seeking?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's funny because I did yoga in itself as an elective in PE in high school. So that's where yoga came in for me. Wow. But at the time in my life, I was 18. So I just it was more just like a physical activity. It wasn't, genuine yoga. So yoga started in my life as a physical practice in high school, but I don't think that I really started using it in a way as a lifestyle until later on in my life. And I don't know if I should go into the details of that now, but I really think a certain event in my life is what kind of brought me to a certain place where I started, really asking deeper questions. And it's funny because I didn't realize it at the time, but when I read your book, I realized that through a certain event in my life and through, honestly, a bunch of different events, I was really creating new I am statements. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what our life experiences are continuously doing, is just redefining who we are in this world.
No question.
And why we are here and what we want to do, what we want to create, what we want to be. And so, I think that for me, this all started when I had a sister that passed away about 5 years ago. And and so through her death, though, as horrible as it was, it made me question these deeper things. And I think sometimes it takes tragedy for us to ask these deeper questions. It doesn't always have to be that way, but from my experience, it brought me to that place. And so then I got back into yoga later on in my life, and it was for different intentions. It wasn't just as a physical practice. It was because, first of all, I knew it was great for your mind, your peace of mind. It was a way that you're able to just sit with your emotions, your grief, your pain, whatever's coming up for you, and really feel it. And there's a phrase that's, you got to feel it to heal it. And that was kind of the mantra that I've always, lived by during this. So for me, that brought me into yoga. And then as I got deeper into it, I realized it was so much more. It's a way of life, and it's a way of living consciously. as the most conscious we can. And it integrates so much. And so that's why I became passionate about teaching it. At first it impacted my life so much. And then it was like, wow, this is something that I want to share with the world. So that's how I got into teaching it.
Well, I really appreciate you sharing with that. I did not know about that, about passing of your sister. So I'm really sorry to hear that. I'm really glad that you found yoga, and through yoga found a spiritual path and a way of healing and beginning that process and that path. On a side note, I had no idea that they offered yoga in gym class in high school. So
I know, right? I don't know if they still do, but the funny thing is I never did PE in high school. I had a walking class and then yoga class. So I guess there's ways to get out of it.
Yeah. And who says that the education system can evolve and change since they're offering yoga?
Right. That's a good point. I think that needs to be within our education because it is so important to navigate how to live consciously.
No question. And I'm glad they're doing it physically. And one of my whole missions is to eventually get them to do it intellectually through classes on self-awareness. So it's really good to see that from a physical standpoint that they're open in doing that. So that's great. So,
and meditation too. I want to add that in. I think they're bringing a lot of meditation into school and it's powerful.
Yes. So very, very powerful. So you've been on the spiritual path for a while. So what are some of the things that you've learned through learning to work through your grief and learning to understand more about life? Have you found some of the answers that you've been looking for, or is that still in progress?
I think it's always still in progress for sure. And I think a lot of it is things that I've always felt I've known, but it's just kind of re-emphasize them in my life. And the biggest one, I mean, it's really just simple things that I've known. It's like, we can't control what's going on out there. We need to just focus more on our inner world. But it's so hard because it's like, we know that, but then it's like the moment we go out into the world, I try to control things. We try to control things. It's part of our humanity. It's part of our survival instinct, I think.
No question.
So for me, that's what my practice has been, is just is consistently trying to cultivate my inner world and figure out what's going on inside.
Well, you're definitely on the right path. And yes, the only thing I'll say is it's as hard or easy as you make it based on your understanding. But you're right. The world can draw you into it the minute that you go out into it. There's a lot of traps out there, a lot of negativity. And that can be something that you immediately forget all your spiritual practice when your habitual emotions kick in and your defense mechanisms kick in. So I'm really glad you're on this path because it continues to open up more of the understanding about the outside world and why the world is the way it is. And then when you step into it and you see the traps that are out there, you can take that vital moment of pause and breath to say, why is this happening to me? What's the opportunity for me in terms of my reaction to it? That is the beginning of conscious control. That's the beginning of conscious control versus unconscious reaction. Where you're so far down the emotional side on it that you don't know how to get out. So yeah, but I think you're right. I think that's one of the toughest things for people is that you learn all this and then you've got to apply it, apply it. And
and that's what it is too, is like when you go into, whether it be a yoga studio or your own home to do your practice, that's what it is for me, really, is just sitting in that place of stillness and witnessing what the heck is going on so that I can get the clarity I need when I go back out in the world. So it's almost equally important, our spiritual work in, our meditation, and then out in the real world, where they're both equally important. So, I think that
that's exactly right. One of my biggest things in life when it comes to spirituality is how people separate that when you can't. If you're truly spiritual, you have to realize that your practice, the whole point of it is to take it into your world
Yes.
and apply it. And a lot of people that I see sometimes get caught in, oh, I'm going to meditate and lose myself. And then they're the same person when they get back into their real life. And then they just use the meditation or the yoga for that moment of escape. But the real teaching, in, again, my opinion,
yes,
is to learn it through whatever practice, whether it's meditation, yoga, reading, whatever it is, so that you can embody it for real application when real challenge hits you in the real world, rather than use it for escapism. To me, that's next level spirituality, next level mindfulness, and it's embodying the teaching fully.
yes, absolutely. And
It's
it
what,
takes a lot of awareness too. I think you talked about that too in your book with um, even addiction. And it's like, you can even be addicted to meditation because it's a comfort zone. And I can catch myself when I'm like, okay, I'm retreating from the real world because I don't want to deal with things.
right.
So it takes us really catching ourselves and being conscious aware of when we're even using meditation as a way to retreat or hide away from what's coming up for us.
Exactly.
So
and that's okay. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that's okay. That's okay if you need it to go to it. But
Yes.
what you don't want to do is say that you don't want it 100% of the time to need to do that. You want to be able to take enough teaching to see that whatever's triggering you or causing you pain, that's causing you to want to go to meditation, that at some point you need to turn and face it with a new energy and a new perspective, because that new energy and new perspective is what's going to begin to change the circumstance. A lot of people ask me all the time, do you meditate a lot? I do meditate at times when I feel like I really need to get centered and I'm really off and I really need to go to that place of balance, which brings that clarity again.
Mm-hmm.
But I've learned to take the meditation into my life so much that I call it what's called walking meditation, where you just are that same state that you are in the meditation.
Absolutely.
Which is that state which is full of infinite possibility. And not only that, full of infinite understanding. Now, that's the part of self-awareness. In order to get an understanding for the world, you have to get it for your own self. So that's why self-awareness and all the work you're doing in learning and going through, your book club and digging into these great books is so helpful, because the more you learn about yourself, the more you can see the truth about the world. I think it was Lao Tzu or Confucius, I can't remember which, who said, to know the world, you don't have to step out your front door. You can sit and look from out your window and know the whole world. And what he was offering was that by knowing yourself.
That's what I love. I love it when you talked about that and you started your book with that, of you looking out into the starry night sky and having that understanding just from being in the stillness of nature. And it's like, but how do we take that moment and bring it into our lives? That's a real spiritual practice. Yeah. It's like, we know this, we experience it, but then how do we integrate it consistently?
Yeah. And so I'll answer that, because that moment in my childhood, looking on and seeing that many stars in the sky, was a cataclysmic moment, a trigger for wonder and awe at an epic level in my mind that sparked questions that I never knew I had before until I saw that. So it wasn't so much of an answer as a spark of inquiry and wonder about all that and my connection existentially to all of it. How did that relate to me? What was I doing here? Like, I was in this bubble of a 13, 14-year-old going through life.
Yeah.
But how did that get there? Like, someday it would be really cool to figure that out. So I knew from, I guess, a deep view that there was something more to understand, because how can you not think of that when you see all that?
Yes.
The question was, how was I going to understand it? And it all started with a question. Who am I? How am I related to that? What's my life about? And what's my place in this world? And then that sat in the background of my mind but that curiosity led my life. So whatever I did, it was always a curiosity. Are we, what are other people thinking? Do we all think the same? Or is this just some sort of fake reality? Is there something beyond this?
The deeper you think about it, you're like, the more you realize there's so much you don't know.
Exactly. And there's a lot of different rabbit holes you can go down that take you on these wild, like alternate universes and all this stuff that I explored until the real realization, or the one that really satisfied the question. I like to say, how do you know you have an answer? And when you no longer have the question. So the one that satisfied the question was really that there is only ever one reality, and it's this moment.
Mm-hmm.
Everything else is a theory.
Mm.
Because this is what is tangible, experiential, and true. So this is reality. So
you've taken that in.
I know it's a deep one, right? That's a big one. So what's interesting is you're so deep for such a young person. What kind of an upbringing did you have? I mean, was it a spiritual upbringing? Was it a religious upbringing? How did your path start?
Mm-hmm. I grew up a Christian, so always in the Christian religion, and I went to a Christian private school from preschool to 8th grade. I did worship too for the church, and I've always loved the worship and yoga. Now I feel I still do that in my yoga practice, but it's bhakti, which means devotion, and kirtan, which is this call and response of calling out these divine names and ancient names. So for me, it's just all different forms of worship. And I almost think that throughout my spiritual path, my idea of God just got so much bigger. Mm-hmm. But I still take all these teachings of Jesus and I live by them completely. Awesome. And I think that Jesus's story holds so much depth of surrender and living consciously and taking, that aha moment that we have or that we want to hold on to and keeping it throughout our life. So, and I think a lot of religions have the same goal. They just speak different languages. And for a long time, I didn't understand that. It was so hard to grasp because I put God in a little box. But now I can take that religion and just apply it in a lot bigger ways and take something from all religions. So that's where I am. And I know that people have their own views on that. And I think we can. Right. Because God is so much bigger. It's hard for us to put words to it.
That is so profound. I think that's why for me to even utter the word, it stops in my throat, because to even speak the word is to almost contain it, if that makes sense. It gets
contain is the perfect word. Yes.
And as I looked at ancient religions, like in ancient Judaism, they don't even speak the name, they just bend at the knee. And I didn't understand that at all younger, and I think many who pray just do it because they know that's what they're supposed to do. But I think the real meaning behind not speaking the word and bending is just this unspeakable reverence for something that is larger than the mind can contain. And what's cool is when I was younger, I didn't put a box around God either. I just left it open for me to someday. I mean, I was told from different people, and I saw it in all these different religions, the way it was explained. And, when you're young, is it a man with a white beard and a staff in the sky and, throwing lightning bolts down and, so, but as I got older, I just left it open. Like someday that's going to make sense. And now it's every time I think, it goes to silence. It's almost unspeakable. It's that large. But for a lot of minds, it's very literal. It has to be literal. People want a personal, they talk about a personal relationship that's meaningful to a lot of people. And so they want to put it in a form that is connectable. And I think the bigger sometimes the idea gets, people feel that it's less personal, which is ironic because the bigger the idea gets, the more personal, because it's coming from every part of your reality.
Wow. That's powerful. That is so true.
Nature, every condition out there, people, moments. Yeah, so that's the interesting part about it. So that's
and that's
great.
what I love. Yeah, that's what I love doing as one of my main spiritual practices, is looking at the eyes of each person I know and seeing the face of God.
Wow.
Looking at all creation and seeing it as God. And
wow. Now
and
that's
that
powerful.
always that always realigns you. And but would you refresh my memory of where you started in your spiritual path? Were you religious before? I think we talked about it before, but I want to know your journey prior to that experience.
So my journey was, I grew up in Judaism light. You were told you have to have a bar mitzvah. So I went to Hebrew school for 4 years to read, write, and speak it. And when I was doing it on stage, I sang it beautifully. And at the same time, I'm thinking to myself, wow, 4 years of reading, writing, and speaking this, and I have no idea what the spiritual implication of this is.
Wow.
And I don't blame anybody. I think teachers were doing the best they can with their knowledge, but it was cool because it set me on a journey one day to figure out something bigger for myself. And I didn't understand, not that there's a lot of dogma in the religion, but I wanted to open up and understand more about life. And so, again, I've been very curious and always asking questions. I decided that my religion is a religion of love, and I'm going to understand how all these other religions interpret the world and interpret life, and see the beauty in all of them for their particular style or culture or way. It's like music, right? There's not just one type of music that lifts your soul. There's an array. There's jazz and there's rock and there's blues and so there's all different ways to experience music. And I think in the same way of spirituality, there's all these different ways to experience the nature of what I would say divinity. So my religion,
I love that analogy. Yeah, thank you.
Sure. So that's what I've learned. I mean, I appreciate my heritage, my culture, the struggles of ancestry. I don't have any. That's something I honor and respect. And the soul food in my will never. That's in my genes. So that's I'll always be accustomed to. But from a standpoint of understanding and evolving of mind, we have to go beyond the division, and ours is right, yours is wrong. We have to celebrate our differences in the way that we experience life, just like we celebrate different cultures, just like we celebrate different foods. Doesn't mean that it's our favorite, but we can enjoy it and respect that it's theirs. And as long as there isn't a part of the religion that is impressing upon, manipulating, hurting, or forcing their way against the will of another, celebrate and be however you want to be. Absolutely. That's the only demarcation line for me of when we need, as a society, to look at ways to protect the people that they're pushing, when it's a manipulatory, nefarious type of, hey, our way or else, which is extremism in its real essence and definition.
That's so true.
But I really think that's why I think that conscious evolution of mind is what's going to bring us together. We can celebrate the differences that make us unique and distinct, and yet come together as humanity in that celebration.
That's so true. And it reminds me of what we had talked about too with the lighthouse theory and your necklace symbolizing it. Yeah.
Right.
And I loved it because I think that was one of the most, and for those of you watching, it was a conversation that we had in our book club discussion. And we were talking about how people, ourselves included, sometimes feel like we need to become something in this world or, make a huge point in order to impact the world in such a transformational way. And our whole existence as physical matter in itself is all we need to know, that our lives and what we do in our lives are making a massive ripple effect.
Wow.
So what was it that because you explain it so beautifully with the lighthouse.
Well, from a lighthouse perspective, and why I have the necklace is I've always seen this work as something where people are on their journey, and if they hit a rough patch where they need just a little guidance and a little light, the best state of mind that you can be in, the more consciously aware you are because you've done the work on yourself, the more you can be that light to someone and shed that on them at the moment they need it when they're passing through. Not that you want to proselytize or evangelize, but just that you're offering that light to them on their journey. And I think what you said is so profound. We don't need to do big things in the world if it's not our path or our journey. Not even need, all we can hope to do is just as we work on ourselves and understand more and go through our struggles and learn and become more compassionate and more loving, that energy itself has an impact on the world. Your beingness, just being who you are, simply will have an effect in a way that you can't even imagine as it ripples across the universe. Mm-hmm. And you will be used by this universe if you say, hey, universe, I want to be used in any way, in my small way or medium-sized way or big way. The universe is very intelligent and it knows our intents and our truth. And so when the time's right, it uses you, just like right now, right? And so as you said, this is the role I want to play, and I want to develop a book club, I want to teach meditation, I want to teach yoga, and boom, here you are. We're having this great conversation, which hopefully touches a lot of lives. So,
and I always go back to just when I had first messaged you, and I'm like, because I had started this book club and I had this book, and I'm like, I'm just gonna try and message him. Maybe he'll come on and talk to us. That'd be awesome. And just where that one choice, the ripple effect that had, that it's brought us here, it just has so much power in understanding that your choice has so much power in every moment and such a massive ripple effect.
Right. But it took courage, right, to do that. Like whatever fear, oh, maybe he won't respond, or who cares, or,
and just your self-doubt of like, oh, well, yeah, we have self-doubt over over everything, I think. And
that's a subject I want to touch on, because you're right. Yeah. We do, our mind, or the negativity of our mind can try and contain us in the comfortable, no matter how uncomfortable that comfortable has been, so to speak. It can try and contain us. And so the ability to stretch and just feel a little nerves again in this situation, or any situation in where you do something where you feel vulnerable to get a yes or a no, I've come to the conclusion, if I believe in what I'm doing, who cares? I'm going to be respectful about it. I'm going to type a nice email. I'm going to leave a nice message. I'm going to present, but I'm not going to stop the creativity that I feel from moving forward because I'm projecting what might happen. I'm going to work out of infinite possibility. And if it's a non-response or a no, or it just doesn't move forward, then that's fine. I will keep going and take the river and flow wherever it does go. But self-doubt is a big one.
Mm-hmm. And I have a question for you. With you even putting out your book, did you experience any of that self-doubt of like, oh, well, people don't care what I have to say? Or, I mean, did you have that?
So that's such a great question. Yes is the answer to that. And I'll tell you, when the first bit of self-doubt came, when I was I was journaling, and all this poetry came out, and I said to my wife, wow, this is really cool stuff. Like, I really like this. Like, it's fun, and it feels good to me, and it flows, and it gets a point across. And I'm like, I think I should write. And she's like, well, whenever you're ready, go for it. I'm like, okay. And so the doubt started when, I hadn't written since college, but I decided to write a manuscript. A year later, 8 months later, I had a full manuscript because I wrote every day. And then I had to make this call. And the call wasn't to a publishing house or an agent yet. It was just simply to an editor to help me to just clean it up in a way where it was tight enough to be able to present to an agent of substance, or to be able to send to a publisher of substance. So I demonstrated enough integrity and intention in that end of it. So I called one of the best editors in New York that had done some work on books that I thought were well done. And this is where this did I ever have self-doubt part come. So when I got the phone number, and when I picked up the phone to dial, I hung up after I dialed it. My whole body was shaking. Because this edit, I knew what the editor was going to do. They were going to read the book and critique it.
Yeah. It's vulnerable too.
Oh my gosh. 6 times I picked up the phone, dialed the number, and hung it up. On the 7th time, I stayed on the phone and she answered. And she challenged me. Why should I edit your book? And I'm like, wow, okay. And I just went into, here's what I think this is. Here's why I think it's important. I would love to have you edit it. And before I start to go to agents and publishers, and I got done with the end of my speech. I don't even remember what I said. And she said, wow, okay, send me the manuscript. Wow. So that was like a big moment of self-doubt because I knew I was going to be exposed. And then after that, then once that was done, then there was a little bit of vulnerability in querying agents because you don't know what's going to happen. And undoubtedly there's rejection letters and you have to go through that. But I just kept pressing on because ultimately I had decided whether or not I was going to get an agent or a major publisher, I was still going to get this book out to the world. So I didn't care, it was going to get out. If I had to drive around in my SUV to bookstores with self-published books, I would do it. And I think that freed me up in the process and took away that element of need, which can work against you.
Mm-hmm. And I think too, like even when we put any kind of work into the world, that feeling of vulnerability and her questioning, why should I put this into the world? When we're able to be in that place and answer those questions, oftentimes we're like, it's mirroring back to us our own self-doubt. And when we're able to, like you were in that place of saying, this is why, in that moment, that self-doubt dissolves away. And that's why it's so powerful. Like just put your work out there and have faith that, you'll have the right people that will clean it up, but the message in it that you feel in your heart that you want to share, like, don't doubt that. Trust that, have faith in that. And I loved your whole chapter on faith.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. My wife's been great at telling me and reminding me that if it touches one person, mission accomplished. And absolutely. I'm like, that is a great thing to remember when you're doing any kind of art or any kind of work. And obviously, first and foremost, it should be because you want to put it out in the world. You want to create. But you have to be doing it because of what's flowing through you. And it will go where it's supposed to go, or you will learn what you need to learn about how to meet your audience or what where you've been missing. Sometimes you can be here, the audience can be here, and that's okay. It was supposed to reach who it reached. If your intent is to reach a larger, then you have to reflect on how you want to make adjustments as long as it doesn't compromise your authenticity. And there's been so many artists in the world that have compromised their authenticity and it didn't go anywhere because management or people above them or what they call the suits that came in and said, this is how we want to shape you. One of my favorite stories actually on that is Katy Perry and how she was tried to be made into someone else for so many years. And she just wanted to be this fun, wild
child.
And when she finally got to be herself, it exploded, it just, which I've tried to remember, as a lot of people give, and I trust a lot of people give me great advice, but I always have to remember it has to feel right with me. But yes, you're right, Tierney, is that you put it out and go from there. You adjust from that point. Yeah.
That is a powerful lesson. And I think even too, just understanding that, like you said, having it touch just one life and that your story, your whatever it is you're bringing to the world, it does have matter. And even in my book club, I found like it's so beautiful because it's given just a place for people to share from their hearts. And just in listening to each person, I get something from hearing their perspective or what they got from the book and how they applied it in one area. Like your personal lessons always have this universal lesson because it's part of humanity. So,
wow, that's really good. Yeah, we're connected to the collective consciousness. So even though we have our unique talents and creative ideas and what we want to do, there's a time when we're so connected to what the collective is looking for but we don't know that. We just have to go with what's driving through us, raise our hand and say, I'm willing to be vulnerable and put this out, and then see what happens. The more that you let go in that way, the more powerful it can become.
I had it taught to me too that just as humans, we're just meaning making machines. So we're constantly battling our mind, like, is it good? Is it bad? Is it right? Or is it wrong? And trying to make sense of things, but it's like, it just is. Yeah. It's such like a simple, like, don't try and make it mean anything. It's right. It's just happening. And but that in itself is something that I struggle with grasping, but
have struggled with.
Yeah. Things are just happening, and we're like, no, things aren't just happening. We just try to make so much meaning of, I think you even talk about in your book, of content and then putting context to it. And we do that throughout our whole life. Right.
And that's the process of life. And when you're trying to create something, you do need feedback in order to adjust based on what your intention is. But if your intent is just to put it out and it is what it is, then you don't need any feedback, right? But if your intent is, hey, I always want to keep a monitor on myself, not that it'll affect your authenticity, but just so you're aware of where you are in relationship in the context with the collective consciousness. Like part of my mission with this work is to broaden the appeal so that more people in mainstream can feel relatable to this work and will come to it. And if mainstream puts their hands up on anything that's too esoteric or a little too this or a little too that, I didn't want to give the ego any chance to do that with this work. I just wanted to make sure that, okay, but it wasn't going to affect the quality or the depth of what was coming out.
That's a good point.
Yeah. And so when you're creating music or when you're creating art or when you have to be authentic to what you're doing and not let anything influence you until it comes to the point at which you're trying to attempt to connect in a certain way. You have to have a certain amount of awareness. And it's tricky because you don't want to affect the authenticity of the work. You just want to make sure you're in sync intuitively with how people receive, or else time will become a factor in that process. And it'll take a little longer. So you have to be really comfortable with who you are in order to go down that, because a lot of people can lose themselves in becoming something else, sort of selling out or selling their soul because they want this to happen so fast that they quote sell their soul and okay, I'll do this, but then it's not authentic and they don't know who they are.
Trying to prove something. Yeah. Just like you talked about proving your identity as what, and really getting clarity on that. So it's so, and you put it in such a beautiful way in your book, because my whole life I always thought this ego was this bad thing, and you put it in a way that it's not a bad thing. It's just constantly trying to prove what you believe yourself to be.
Correct. It's trying to protect it, defend it, and validate it. It wants validation when it doesn't feel like you don't feel yourself because, I don't know, just simple one in a relationship, you haven't gotten the love that you feel you want from that relationship. You haven't felt that closeness. Something needs to happen to validate that feeling for you. Or if you're an athlete that believes himself to be a champion and you go through a couple of tournaments where you haven't won, your ego's, all right, come on, man. Like you say you're this, let's go. And it's going to drive you to find that experience. Or if someone makes a comment that gets under your skin, your ego is going to go into red alert and try and defend what it believes to be true about yourself, that comment has invalidated. So it's revealing to you what you think is true about yourself. So I use it as a way as, okay, it's an ally. I'm not going to resist it anymore. Let me see what it's doing so that it'll help me find the path to my truth that's been in my subconscious. Wow. Yes. I had no idea this was triggering me because I did not believe this about myself. And my ego was working hard to prove what I wanted to believe against my deeper truth, but it never was going to do it until I believe it. So at least I now see where that disconnect is. Does that make sense?
Yes. Understanding where you are in relationship to your true nature, which in my eyes is something we can't label. I think our true nature is consciousness. pure consciousness, and we can do with it and manifest with it whatever we want. And that choice is ours. That's where our free will comes into hand.
Wow.
But it's a great roadmap for us to understand, okay, what am I trying to prove that I'm manifesting myself as? So
exactly.
Yeah, it's a great toolkit.
Exactly. Well, the truth is consciousness is the same thing as infinite potential. We are infinite potential. The question is, within that sea of infinite potential, within the expression of the universe's infinite possibility, how do we want to define who we are? What is our unique way of expressing ourselves, and how do we want to be? And the interesting thing about this is that so many people go through life and don't realize that they have the paintbrush in their hand on how that art gets painted. They think it's an automatic process, that they're a victim of their childhood upbringing, circumstances, whatever. And while that may have laid the path that is unchangeable by them and not their fault, once this moment occurs, we realize, wow, you get to choose. Once you're endowed with that awareness, it changes everything. That's the tipping point, because now you get to decide within this canvas or this palette of color, what color do I want to express? Who do I choose to be? And the best way to take full control over that is by being able to look without any guilt, shame, or regret at who you have been for context. What do I want to leave behind? And what do I want to continue to honor going forward as I learn to make new choices and new decisions?
Absolutely.
And that's free will, like you said, which is, again, it's amazing. Your depth at this age, really, it's really cool, Tierney, where you're at. And it's awesome. I can't imagine how many people you're going to help in your lifetime.
And something I want to add on that, because even with what's happening right now, just because I've been just sitting back and trying to, obviously, as a human, make meaning of it all.
Right.
But one thing that I've felt that I've needed to say to people is, we all feel a lot of feelings right now, and that's okay, but let's focus on the I am. Like, let's let those feelings, whatever they are, and no one can take them away from you, whatever feelings you have, let them ignite these powerful I am statements now of what you want to be. I feel sad, therefore I want to be this. Like, let's try not to identify with our emotions, because we aren't, but don't also take away someone's emotions and say you shouldn't feel that, as long as, and I think that's where we're struggling as humanity.
That's a very profound point. You're right. We see what's going on in the world. It brings us sorrow, and we want to do something to help. And we feel helpless in a lot of cases with where we sit in relationship to the disconnect of where somebody else is, or a different race, or a different feeling. So what can we do? And what I always offer is that the choice that you make of who you want to be in this moment, after you've seen that, what does that do to who you are? And for me, when I see it, the amount of love that I will offer to the world will just go up 10x of whatever it was yesterday. I'm just, whatever I thought, oh, maybe I shouldn't say that, or maybe I shouldn't do that. Forget that. Screw that. I'm saying it. I'm not holding back love. I'm not holding back goodness, because what it reflects to me is that the world needs more of this right now.
Yes.
Our country needs more of this right now. And so it just opens the floodgates. I don't know if you remember the story in I Am about the person that goes to the grocery store and they saw a war on TV that really depressed them. And they have the choice of going through the checkout, being depressed and not even noticing the checkout person, or deciding everywhere I go, I'm going to leave a little love, expression, happiness, joy in someone's life. And they notice, because of that mindfulness and that intent to do that, they notice the checkout person is in a down mood, and they think to themselves for 2 seconds, hey, how are you doing today? The checkout person almost looks at them a little surprised that they even got asked that question, because so many people come through like they're a robot there. And they're like, oh, I'm good. Thank you for asking. Yeah, you look a little down. You okay? Everything all right? I just want to thank you for doing this and being here. And they're like, wow. And as the story goes, it's in I Am, but it's a whole cataclysmic events of dominoes that fall from that point, where the woman goes home that night. She was depressed. She was going to take her life because someone noticed her and was nice to her. She takes the bullets out of the gun. She decides not to do it. That leads to her thinking about her mother, who she hasn't spoken to. She calls her. She talks to her mom. They're so happy. They haven't talked in years. The mother's so excited. She calls the brother, who she hasn't spoken to in a year, who's living overseas. She talks to him. He happens to be an ambassador for the war-torn country that was on the news. He gets excited and inspired by the sister's story about her daughter, that he was about to give up on the peace talks. And instead of giving up on the peace talks, because of that phone call, he's inspired to go and get the war factioning parties together one more time. And they get together and they sit down, and that causes the ceasefire. And the guy that saw that on TV, that went to the grocery store, that decided to just offer some humanity or some love in that moment, had no idea the ripple effect of what just happened. And the next day he looks up on TV, and on the news he sees ceasefire and over in this country. And he's like, wow, that's cool. And he never knows that he affected it all.
And that's the work of when we take the time to understand our anger, our sadness. I'm angry because I'm not seeing this. Okay, so now I can bring this into the world. But it takes us really sitting with that emotion, understanding that emotion. And it's another thing I want to bring up too, is that instead of trying to ask people, how are you doing? I've been trying to make it a practice of, how are you feeling? So that I can understand. And I did it this morning. I don't know if you remember Gail from Book Club. She renamed herself Light.
Oh yeah, sure.
Beautiful Black woman, but she named herself Light. She is,
I love the name.
Really the embodiment of love. And right before this, I texted her and I said, how are you feeling? And she said, oh my God, can you call me right now? And I said, yeah, absolutely. But I'm going to do this podcast right now. But she called me and she said, I'm so glad you used the words, how are you feeling? Because I just went to the police station right now and told them that my heart, it hurts. I feel sad. And right after doing this, because I guess the protesters were coming into her area, and she was telling the cops, I don't want this violence anymore. It's hurting me. I feel sad. And she said, having you say, how do you feel, meant a lot. So I just think, and I think there's a podcast with Brene Brown that talks about how much we avoid it. Because if you were to go, say to your wife when you're leaving in the morning, how are you feeling? And she's like, horrible, but you got to go. What are you supposed to do? And so we almost want to just like say, how are you doing? Good. And we don't want to talk about our feelings. But it's so powerful when we can take the time to understand them and not feel like we need to do something to fix that person's feeling. Just hold the space for them to feel what they want to feel.
And that's the key right there, is just to hold the space, to be able to feel and just say, just to know that somebody asked them on a different level and connected with them, rather than just say, hey, how you doing? Like without, just as what we say as in casual bite line conversation, but you're actually more mindful. How are you feeling? And then you say, if there's anything I can do, let me know. But I'm glad you expressed that and shared that with me. And I think sometimes that's just enough for people to know there's another human being that cares. And although they can't solve my problems, they want to know that they're connected with me in that way. So that's really cool. Good for you, and for doing that.
Yeah, I think that's what we all want, is just to have our feelings validated a lot of the time. And when we can all hold that space for each other, we can all collectively feel those feelings and then hopefully heal them. But I think there's power in using that as a practice.
Yeah, it's empathy, and empathy leads to understanding and intuition and compassion, so that instead of judging someone, you switch it to an understanding. And then through the understanding, there's a different energy. Now, that doesn't mean that through understanding and compassion, you don't condone if there's a behavior that is detrimental. But just the switch from judging them to going, I don't condone what's going on, but I understand it. And I'm not gonna judge it. I'm gonna have empathy for them.
Right.
That can calm it. Right. That energy can have an effect of calming it down when more people collectively do that. But I think one thing resistance or force creates is counterforce. And just like a young baby crying that wants to be picked up from the crib, it wants to know that it exists. And mother's attention is existence to an infant. And if you don't pick the infant up, it's going to cry at a much higher level and then another higher level, because it's looking to know that it matters and it exists. And through a mother's attention, that's its survival mechanism. And so from a societal standpoint, when a group feels completely invalidated by the events, especially by those in authority, it can be very triggering to a sense of you mean nothing. And then the snapback is, I will show you that I matter. Here's how I'm going to do it. So I think just through an understanding of how are you feeling, it begins to bridge that gap.
Yes. Yes. And there was another point I wanted to make on that. Now I just lost my thought.
That's okay.
But it will have to come back to me. It was on feeling this current situation.
Okay. So when it comes back, let me know. In the meantime, I'm going to ask you another question. So now that you've gone down this journey, and you look at, when I say your younger self, I mean, you're young in terms, from my perspective, at 24, but what would you like to say to your younger self with what you've learned now? And I can't imagine what you're going to know another 10 years from now, but what would you like to say to your younger self if you could talk to that person? What advice, what wisdom would you give your younger self?
That is a good question. Well, when I was doing work, I was working with a shaman for a while, and I did a lot of work going back to specific moments. And so for me, it had always been going back to myself in specific moments and asking myself, what were you needing in this moment that you didn't get? And understand, and being with that little girl, and giving her the love that she didn't feel, or giving her that. So for me, it's just, I feel like I just want to continually go back to any experience where I felt like I wasn't experiencing the love or the validation or whatever that I felt I needed, and giving it to myself. That's a really good question.
All right. Well, I'll go. And that was good. I think, given the love to yourself that you felt you weren't getting, because when we're young, we feel that we're always looking for approval.
Yes.
That we're good enough.
And then we let those experiences carry out if we don't resolve them.
We're looking to fit in when we become teenagers. We're looking to fit in with everybody and find our place and find our identity and find our understanding. And I think the younger we can realize, and there has to be a certain formulation of the identity and the ego that takes hold before this teaching can come in, because that has to happen naturally. The evolution of someone's identity has to happen before you give them the opportunity to change it. Because I found if people are too young, and I've worked with people all the way up to 80 years old, all the way down to 12 and 11 years old. And when you work with someone who's 11 or 12, they're still under the influence of their parents. And so a lot of the work can be diminished because they still feel this need for approval from their parents. And sometimes it's helpful and sometimes it isn't to their soul.
Yeah.
But I guess for me as a younger person, I would have, and my younger person, late teen years, I would have told myself to be more comfortable with who you are, that what you're giving to your world at this moment was good enough, and not to try so hard for approval, because the harder you try, the more you need, you tend to be more disappointed.
Yeah.
Not that there's, I try to live life without any regret whatsoever, knowing that each moment's a learning experience, but that's the biggest message to teenagers. Hey, you should be proud of who you are. And if you're not, don't carry that with you into the next day. Carry with you who you want to be. and then just work from that point.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think I would go back to and say, just the love that you need is within you, that everything, like reminding yourself that to not keep going out there for your peace, for your love, because it's something that we just need within, but it's so hard to understand sometimes.
It is when we feel we need that approval, especially like, boys, well, and girls, they look for approval from the father mainly. They somehow know, in most cases, not all, but in most cases, they intuitively have it from their mother. So they're looking constantly for approval from the father. And for any male figures that are out there that are hearing this, that are fathers, you have no idea how important your approval is to your children. No idea. So to be more conscious of that is really, really important. Yeah, it's an interesting evolution for kids. And that's why, again, I mean, what would you say for your generation? And do most people, are they on a spiritual path, or have you met people or are friends with people that aren't? And is it a mixed bag?
Yeah, that's a good question, because I found myself after coming out of high school and going through, what I had gone through at the time, I was seeking these deeper conversations with people. And I felt like I was starting to shut down because I wasn't having these conversations at parties and, this specific event that we go to, and we just kind of talk about stupid crap. And right. I was like, I want to talk about this. My soul had so many feelings inside and I want to talk about it. But so instead of me being like, oh, why are we talking about it? I'm like, well, then create a space where you can create that. So that's what made me do the book club, because I wanted to hold a space with people that wanted to talk about these things and create that. And so that's where I wanted to inspire other people too. Like, if you're wanting to have these conversations, create that within your family, create that within your community, take action off that desire. And so now in my life, like I'm surrounded by people that are having these conversations, and the people that aren't, like, they've kind of fizzled out in my life. Right. I still love them, but we've, kind of parted ways in some ways. But yeah, I feel like now in my life, that's who I'm surrounding myself with. What about yourself?
No, that's really cool. And I think it's very similar in that as this has happened, there's been people that have stayed in my life and become even stronger. And then a bunch of new people have come in that enjoy having these conversations and discussions and talk. And then there's people that aren't. But I love that you set the intention. There you are at a party and you're like, there's something missing here. This surface stuff is not working for me. I need to go deeper. And that you created it for yourself. I can't tell you how many people I talk to that have that same feeling, that they know there's something deeper they want to understand and they're bored. I don't mean that negatively against the people. It's just, they're not meeting them with what lights their soul on fire and where they want to go. And the deeper conversations that make them feel alive.
And I caught myself creating stories about people of like, people aren't deep, and that's not true. People do want to talk about these things, but we need to create a space for it. I mean,
that's what we're doing right here, right now. That's what's so cool.
Exactly.
And that's the intent. Yeah.
We need to catch ourselves when we're creating stories about people not having depth, because oftentimes it's just, it's not true.
I'll never forget what someone said to me. I was on a trip once with a bunch of guys. We went to race cars, I was invited to go. It was a really cool trip. And we're at dinner, and I kind of keep quiet about my work unless somebody asks. And we're sitting there, and the guy next to me is about, I don't know, maybe 60 years old, and he works in finance, and just in my mind, maybe didn't look like the typical person that, if he knew kind of what I do, I don't know. I just wasn't sure. So I didn't say anything. The guy sitting across from me, a friend of mine, we're about halfway through the dinner, and he says, well, Howard's written a couple books and this is what he does. And he looks at me, he goes, well, what's the work about? And so I told him. Next thing I know, he looks at me and he says, listen, he's like, I know I may not look like the type of guy that's into that stuff, but let me tell you, I need that type of work in my life. So I want to hear more about it. And it hit me to never, ever judge anyone as it relates to the depth of spirituality and people wanting answers, because it is a universal intent. And sometimes their religion doesn't do a very good job of explaining things to them and leaves them with more questions than answers. Sometimes it does, but sometimes it doesn't. And so, again, you could be providing, you have no idea how much you matter in every moment and how much what you're offering could be meaningful. But I love to wait until there's sort of a question in order to meet that space. And invariably the time comes up where there is.
Mm-hmm. So true. And even with what we're going through right now, I think a lot of us are judging the situation of everybody's so angry and people are evil and all that. And I refuse to believe that.
Good for you.
And I remember that one of my greatest teachers has been Marianne Williamson, and one of her quotes is, "View everything as love or a call for love." And I'm viewing this situation as a massive call for love. And I think humanity needs to stand together for that in every single encounter to every single person.
That is absolutely perfectly beautiful and correct. Love does solve everything, but people have to be able to let it in when it shows up. And that's the challenge, is to deal with your feeling of wanting to offer that and someone's lack of readiness for it. But how you even react to that is key. But that's really, really well said, Tierney. So let's talk real quick about music. That's been a part of your life.
Yeah. It, like I said, it started actually a while back. My dad was in a punk band. I don't know if you know that.
Wow. No, I didn't know that.
So he was always playing guitar and singing, and I just would sing with my dad, and, and then later on in my life, I got into worship at my church. But to be honest, I never enjoyed it. I wanted to worship, but I had like so much social anxiety that it was like, I don't want to go on that stage and sing. It was, I couldn't really do the devotion because I was, you're a kid and you're still going through your own fears and social anxieties. So, and then I went into musical theater. It's always been super therapeutic though, for me, just in my own path. I don't know what it is. It just brings me to my heart space.
That's awesome.
But now I do it in my yoga classes, and we do, I'll sing English songs or Sanskrit songs, whatever it is. And for some reason, whenever we do the bhakti and sing together collectively, it's just everyone is connected, because I think music is a universal language, like you're saying. It could be the language of love. And that's why, for me, I'll sit and just do some singing on my own, and it's like it's therapy to me.
No question.
No words. It's just the music. It's the vibration. It's the feeling behind it. And another thing I wanted to add to that too is I think even people that love like angry music or whatever, it's their way of like feeling that emotion of angry, and it can be healthy for them in a way. Like you don't have to go and act out in violence. You could just sing a really angry song, and it's letting you feel that feeling and move it out of the body, because everything's energy. So
exactly. And I learned that in my youth, going to rock concerts, in the 70s and 80s, it just, how that energy of the collective group and consciousness when you're feeling it, it's therapeutic to go to a lot of rock concerts in the late 70s and 80s. Not to date myself, but that was an awesome era for music back then. All right, Tierney. So I'm going to ask you if you will play a few bars of a song for us. That would be awesome if you would do that.
Absolutely. I'll sing one that I had posted previously, and the message in it, I think, is a message that we can all use right now, and that's just to breathe. I think Perfect. That when we tune into our breath, it brings us into the present moment. And for me, that's always been where I found peace. All right.
Awesome.
Get settled. 'Cause you can't jump the tracks, we're like cars on cable, and like cycling hours, food to the table, no one can just
That was amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for doing that, Tierney. I really appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you for listening.
Absolutely. I could talk for hours with you. You have a great insight and mindfulness and a clarity about how you present and offer questions and answers. And so I really, really appreciate you doing this. This is exactly what I'd hoped that this would be on this podcast for people to listen to and experience from someone who's a yoga teacher, someone who teaches meditation, someone who's been on a journey of healing to find their answers and understandings about life. So I honor that in you. I appreciate you doing this with me today. And for people that want to join your book club, is it Transcend Book Club?
Transcend Book Club, yes. Book Club for Conscious Evolution is what we call it.
And that's on Instagram, Transcend Book Club?
It's on Instagram, it's on Facebook, and I live in California, so if you live in California, you can join our book club discussions, which are at the end of the month in person, but it's also if you just want to join online. So we do a new book each month, and your book was absolutely incredible, which I just want to thank you for just putting this work out and then just taking the time to literally sit with us all and like discuss it. I mean, it was so powerful for us to sit with you and really talk about it in depth. So thank you.
My absolute honor. Thank you.
Yeah. So anyone is welcome. It's a very diverse group too. Young girls, old men, you know, it's for anybody. So
that's awesome.
All, yes.
Well, I'm very grateful for you. I'm very grateful for what you do in the world. And Tierney, I cannot imagine how many people throughout your life you are going to touch, grace, and help with your gentleness, your love, and your insight. So thank you for going down your path and through the tough moments in your life, for being able to get through them. And even when you didn't understand, to know that maybe someday you would, and you will. So I appreciate that very much. So thank you.
Thank you, Howard. Thank you for allowing me to be here. And thank you for all that you do in the world as well.
Thank you very much.
And I remember we namaste, so we should end that.
Namaste.
Namaste.
All right, everybody. Thank you for listening to another episode. And I'll be back very, very soon. Take care.